What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic, and I am back with yet another collection update. Still going over a lot of stuff that I missed from last year, but also, me being me, I did some distro diving, found some other cool stuff, and this one actually features some stuff that was sent to me, as well as some things I got in the Metalhead box here recently. No surprise, there's lots of death metal in here because I love death metal, and surprisingly, there was a lot I missed despite how much death metal I picked up last year. But yeah, let's just get right down to this because we got a fair amount to go over here. Astriferous Pulsations from the Black Orb. This is the debut full length from this Costa Rican death metal act. I actually jammed a bit of their EP, The Lower Levels of Sentience, and I probably should have followed up on it, but I just didn't end up picking that one up. But I saw a lot of people talk about this one, and pretty much everything I heard was, yeah, this is absolutely excellent. And yeah, those people were absolutely right. This is very cavernous, dingy, kind of just gross death metal. Lots of heavy Morbid Angel vibes, but also very comparable to a lot of more recent bands. Gut Void, Phobophilic, definitely some Blood Incantation on here, and Malignant Altar, which I think all those bands kind of have a Morbid Angel worship sort of vibe to them anyway, so yeah, we can just kind of circle back to Morbid Angel here. It's very cavernous, but I think it's really well mixed, and one of the things that stood out to me is the bass, namely the tone. The tone is just very warm, and it kind of gives this album like a really nice low end. You get a lot of cool off-time drumming, like this isn't all just blast beats. There are a lot, but there's a lot of cool like twisting, weird patterns on here, which go great with the lurching, undulating, twisting riffs on here. There's also a lot of like kind of death doomish moments on here, especially on Blinding the Seven Eyes of God, Meta Symbiosis, and the last track, which is possibly a personal favorite of mine, Symmetries That Shouldn't Be. That song particularly really lays on the Morbid Angel, but it's that slower Morbid Angel, so kind of a slime of emptiness sort of vibe, I guess. And I love the frequent use of like just flat out creepy guitar harmonies in here. These guys really know how to like set an atmosphere and make it just sound very unsettling at times. But at the same time, this album just delivers riff after riff. They're sludgy, they're gross, and I absolutely love it. Honestly, there really isn't much on here I didn't like. Like, I did think the intro, the Black Orb, is a little strange. Like, it's still musical, but it's mostly driven by the bass, and it's just kind of more about the atmosphere. And while there is one like interlude track, Forlorn and Immemorial, I actually like it. It kind of showcases some cool like Spanish guitar on there. And it's a nice break before you get down to the follow-up track, Ominous and Malevolent, which is both of those things. Like, it's just a dark, brooding track. So I kind of like that little brief atmospheric pause before you get into just, mind-numbingly heavy tracks, which everything that follows that interlude is just fantastic. If you have not jammed this, I strongly recommend it. If you're a big Morbid Angel fan, Incantation too, you get a lot of those little squealies in there that are very Incantation-esque. Check this out. This is an absolutely awesome release. Yet another awesome album I missed last year, but yeah, you're going to run into that even listening to as much music as I do. Check it out. Claustrum. This is the self-titled debut album from this Italian death metal act. Yet another one that I heard a lot of people talk about in terms of like killer death metal releases from last year. And yet another one that I completely missed, and yet another one that I will completely agree with pretty much everyone singing its praises, because this thing is absolutely awesome. The intro, I don't think really kind of matches up. Like, it's, horror sense, but it doesn't come across as like very sinister. It's more like Goosebumps sinister. So yeah, like a little bit more Disney spooky, but when you get down to the riffs, the heaviness on here, this album just flat out slays. Very old school death metal, but very brutal at times. Like, this kind of packs an extra brutal punch, kind of squeezed in between all the classic death metal tremolos on here. Like, again, another one I'd say there's definitely a lot of Morbid Angel influence, but also a lot of that meat and potatoes ethic you would get from bands like, Obituary and Jungle Rot. It's a lot of groove on here, and a lot of just straightforward hooky riffs. Like, the main riff that opens up Zombie Rats, absolutely love it. Like, it's just an instant hook. It's a very simple, almost kind of like New Orleans sludge metal kind of riff, but as it kind of gets into the more like heavy death metal tremolos and such, I don't know, that riff becomes like kind of a cool repeated hook in the song. There's a lot of good riffy breakdowns all over. The production on here sounds really good. It's very crisp, but still kind of like rotten sounding. big sounding drums on here. The drums sound absolutely massive on this thing. While this album does kind of lay on like all the old school kind of meat potatoes charm of like 90s death metal, there's some really cool atmospheric sections on here, like Desire of Death, Nuclear Death, has a decidedly more like ominous build up. There's more synths to it. It kind of takes a little bit of time to let the atmosphere swell before it just absolutely slams into you with some just flat out rotten riffs. Hopeless Despair starts off with some very wet gurgling and noises. I think someone's being choked. Like, I'm pretty sure the end of that sample is someone dying, and then we're off to the races with like a really good aggressive songs, a little bit more blasty, and then Awaiting Doom flat out brings the doom. Slower, more lumbering, droning, heavy riffs. There's even a spoken word that's played backwards on there to get a bit like an extra creepy flair to it. The only real complaint on here I'd have is I think this album is a little bit short. It does have an intro and an outro that kind of cut this down to like about a half an hour's worth of material. But honestly, all of it I think is really good. Like, if this is just fantastic old school death metal, I mean, if you like just rotten, nasty riffs and pummeling drums and kind of everything that death metal generally delivers, you will probably like this, and I definitely want to check out more from this band in the future. So yeah, if you're a big Incantation fan, Morbid Angel, I would even say like a little bit of Cannibal Corpse and maybe a touch of like Swedish death metal in there, like Entombed or Dismember, check this band out. Absolutely awesome release. Kalmah, self-titled. This is the 9th album from this swamp-loving Finnish melodic death metal act. I've been a fan of this band since, God, I think it was For the Revolution was the first one I heard, but then I went back and checked out some of their earlier stuff, namely Swamp Lord, and I ended up really digging them, and I also kind of caught on that they really like swamps. The swamp thing is just kind of a thing that keeps repeating their albums, though none of these tracks actually have the word swamp in it, which I'm a little surprised by, but I mean, you could probably argue the album covers a swamp, so, you know, we'll just go with that. Anyway, this came highly recommended in the comments, namely from one person, but I plan on getting it eventually. I really haven't listened to Kalmah in a while, and, well, this is pretty solid. It's very aggressive melodic death metal, but with those Finnish touches, namely that kind of like folky sort of melody that, you know, always seems to pop up in Finnish melodic death metal. I got into this band around the same time that I was like becoming a huge fan of Children of Bodom, and I found that a lot of their melodies would intersect, but Kalmah always came across as like the heavier, more aggressive, darker band. And this comes out very aggressive right from the rip. Lots of thrashy riffs on Haunted by Guilt, but also on Serve the Untrue and Tons of Chaos, which didn't know you could measure chaos in tons. The songs in here are very high energy, very explosive, but, you know, work a good balance between being like very heavy, but also very tuneful. And there's some good breaks in terms of like the overall style in here. Like No Words Sad Enough is a particularly haunting, kind of dark, somber song. There's really good cellos on it. Like the cellos and guitars really have like excellent harmonies. And Drifting in a Dream, I think, is also a good kind of dreary number as well. Really reminds me a lot of like a more brooding, dark tranquility. And even in those more intense moments when they're a little bit more melody driven, there is sort of like an almost power metal sort of vibe to it, like Red and Black. Red and Black has like, you know, again, these very ascending, major chordy sort of melodies to it, but they're delivered with some intensity, and, you know, there's no clean vocals on here. These are all harsh vocals, so it kind of retains that more kind of gritty edge, but I kind of like that inclusion of like kind of power metal melodies on here every now and then. And Home Sweet Hell is almost kind of like a Monomarth-ish, but like not going for that well, very standard of Monomarth sort of hook. Like it has more intensity to it, more balls, but it still retains that very triumphant vibe to it. Overall, I really dug this. Some of the production on here I thought was, I don't know, like a little bit rough. Like the drums sound kind of odd to me, just in terms of how they were mixed. And I mean, as far as like, you know, being a Kalmah fan for a long time, this is pretty much what I expect from Kalmah, albeit I do think there are some songs in here that are a little bit more intense and occasionally like just a little bit different for them. But overall, like, this is a solid album. If you're a big fan of like specifically Finnish melodic death metal, then I'm pretty sure you would probably like all this. Like, it definitely has the more folky melodies on here. It's not nearly as like atmospheric and, you know, lush as say something like Insomnium, but it does pack a good riffy punch, like pretty much on every track, and if you love lead play, there's just great lead work across the board on here. If anything, this makes me want to like pick up the albums that I'm still missing by Kalmah, just because it kind of reminded me like how good these guys are. But yeah, if you're a big fan of melodic death metal and you like it on the more intense side for the most part, check this out. Snorlax, the Necrotrophic Abyss. This is the debut full-length from this one-man black and death metal act from Australia. Brendan Auld, who plays in bands like Resin Tomb and Feculent, among other bands. This is his, one-man project, which does feature guest spots from a lot of people that he's played in bands in. You do have songs where I believe he is doing the drums, but there are some other songs where he had a different drummer in from, again, one of the many bands he plays in. And outside of that and some vocal guest spots, he is doing everything on here. And honestly, this is pretty damn good. I wonder how he's able to call this band Snorlax, because it is definitely a reference to the Pokemon. And I mean, I know Nintendo's kind of like, big on like, hey, don't associate our properties with stuff. But maybe because he didn't use a picture of it on the cover that, it's fine. Or maybe they just couldn't read the logo. I don't know. I just kind of wonder about that, because that feels like something that would get you in trouble. Anyway, musically, I think this is pretty damn cool. I do think this leans a little bit more on the black metal side, but there are some flat out crushing death metal moments on here, like the title track and Book of Servants. They definitely have a ferocious, kind of just lumbering Morbid Angel vibe. Yeah, I'm going to probably bring up Morbid Angel a lot in here because we have a lot of death metal go over. But on their more black metal side, which is kind of most of this, there is like a lot of atmosphere and melody. Like there are some legit more like shoegazy melodies peppered in with haunting vocals and just very creepy, dissonant melodies across the board, and of course tons of blast beats. And I really wasn't expecting that, just because black and death metal, generally you're kind of like pulling like the most harsh offerings from each side. At least in my opinion, that's generally what most black and death metal does. But here, the black metal side, again, being more atmospheric and kind of melodic, I was kind of surprised by that. And just looking at the album cover with big old devil on it, I was like, all right, this is going to be harsh and brutal pretty much at all times. And actually, it's not necessarily the case on here. Now, this was also mastered by Arthur Risk, too. It has a very lush sound. And once again, Arthur Risk gets another feather in his cap from last year in terms of production, which he had a ton. And overall, I really like the sound of this, though I think in terms of like the levels when this was mixed, the vocals tend to get buried, especially like during like blasty sections where they're droning on tremolo riffs. You kind of just get this scream or groan in the background, and you really can't make it out. At the same time, it kind of does make it sound a little bit more haunting, but I know just like a little bit more in the vocals probably would have helped this a bit for me. The only other issue I had was the song Regenesis, which is just sort of an oddity on here. Like, it doesn't sound like it was mixed and mastered at the same time. Like, it's way more raw, and it's kind of a noisy transitional track. Like, it's just kind of, I don't know, more ambience, and there really isn't like a melody to it. Like, it's just very hellish sounding. And this album is under a half an hour, so I don't think it really needed like a weird filler track to add more atmosphere, because there's plenty of atmosphere in the songs themselves. And it doesn't necessarily set up the last track, the Bastard Seed of Terraformation, super well. That song's got a great build to it too. Like, it starts off very dreary and somber before just absolutely exploding into blasts and tremolos. But yeah, Regenesis kind of just felt like a filler track to me. But overall, I really dug this. This is a really solid album. I like the, again, more atmospheric melodies on here. Like, again, almost kind of shoegazy at times, but not annoying as hell like Death Heaven or anything like that. And when this band gets down to like their more death metal side, it is absolutely excellent. I definitely want to hear more from this band, but I think this guy's in a lot of different bands, so who knows when that'll be. But, if he finds time, I'm totally down for it. If you're a big fan of, I guess, like more atmospheric black metal, but played with like a death metal sort of vibe to it, I guess that's a way to describe this. Like, once again, some big Morbid Angel vibes in the more death metal centric songs, but in terms of the black metal side, I could even say like it kind of has that droning atmospheric quality of a band like Ghostbath. I don't know. All I know is you should check it out, because this is awesome, and maybe check it out before he gets in trouble from Nintendo, because I just don't know how he's able to keep that name without getting in trouble. But either way, check him out. Dripping Decay, Festering Grotesqueries. This is the first full length from this Portland, Oregon death metal act. I actually went over their demo, Watching You Rot, a while ago. I really enjoyed it. It's just grimy, old school, gross death metal, and nothing has really changed. Actually, the only thing that's really changed is there's probably more dripping and oozing on the album cover this time. Now, this band features current and former members of bands like Blood Freak, Frightmare, and even Conducting from the Grave, which I think is interesting because that's more of a deathcore act, but this is straight up death metal. Actually, I would even say maybe death metal and a little bit of death grind in there. There's a lot of stuff in here that reminds me of early Exhumed in particular. Like, I would say the first 3 Exhumed albums in particular, because this moves at like Mach 10. It's grimy, it's filthy sounding. There's a lot of extra bleh on the vocals, and I absolutely love it. And yeah, this is just full throttle fun, blasty as hell. Songs like Abundant Cadaveric Waste, Gut Muncher, Barf Bag, and the eponymous track all pack a fierce grindy punch to it. I mean, maybe a little bit gore grindy because, I mean, yeah, listen to these song titles. This is definitely kind of gory and gross, but almost kind of like silly and over the top, and I really just enjoy that, like being self-aware about how over the top and ridiculous death metal themes can be. I generally embrace that because, I mean, you gotta embrace it. It's ridiculous music, but we love it. It does slow down and have some like groovier pockets, like namely on Bay of Blood, Watching You Rot, and the song Dissolve Me. There's lots of killer harmonies on there, lots of good breakdown grooves, especially on Dissolve Me. There's an awesome breakdown and lead section there that's just catchier than hell. And this also has some really cool guests on here. You have Matt Ferry of Coffin Dust and Slasher Dave of Acid Witch on here, both supplying some awesome extra vocals. And if you're not familiar with Coffin Dust, very, very much along the same lines as this band. And again, kind of thrashy, fast, kind of grindy death metal, but still sounds like it was concocted in a swamp or a tomb at the same time. Limitless Sacrifice was also a big standout because that one kind of brings a little bit of doom and gloom to it before inevitably taking off into blast beats and just absolutely ripping riffs. And that's pretty much the bulk of this. Just killer riffs, fast-paced, super aggressive and gross and grimy and rotten. The production, I think, is pretty much perfect for what they were going for. It sounds a little bit muddy, but it's well mixed and well separated. And there's not a second of momentum lost in here. This album just kind of hacks and slashes its way through you like Jason Voorhees slashes and hacks his way through fornicating teenagers. If you're a big fan of bands like Exhumed, Coffin Dust, Autopsy, I would even say Nunslaughter to a degree too. Definitely check this out. We really wanted to go over this one when it dropped, but again, I think this came out like during like September or October, maybe even late August, and that whole period was just absolutely swamped with killer releases that we ended up missing because there were so many other ones that we had to go over. Either way, absolutely killer album. Glad I picked it up, and you should definitely check it out. Speaking of Nunslaughter, we have a split here between Nunslaughter and Kurnugia. This is the Halls of the Leviathan split. This came out in December of last year. I didn't even know about it up until a couple of buddies of mine on Facebook, hit me up and say, hey, did you see this? And I was like, no, fuck. All right, well, I'm gonna have to snag that. Now, this is pretty cool for a couple of reasons. One, this is, I believe, officially Nunslaughter's 74th split. I actually went through and counted, and I might be off a little bit. It could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less, but I know it's in the 70s, which is just an insane number in terms of splits. The other cool thing about this is these are 2 live studio sessions. This doesn't necessarily feature any new work on it, but it is all done live in the studio. You can hear them chatting with the guys that are actually, sitting around watching them do this, but I absolutely love that. I really dig Kurnugia's side just because I haven't heard all the material on there. I just have their debut full length, which is absolutely crushing, just groovy, nasty, old school, no frills death metal delivered with such a ferocious punch. I know Paul is also the front man of Embalmer right now, and a dude is just absolutely hilarious and just, a great fucking front man in general. But I really dug their side because I got to hear some of their earlier tracks, and I might have to hunt down their earlier EPs now. And that isn't to say Nunslaughter's side isn't absolutely killer. I mean, they pack, some definite favorites of mine on here. I mean, the big one, Raid the Convent. Everyone loves that song, or at least everyone should love that song. If you're a Nunslaughter fan, pretty sure you love that song. But at the same time, I might give you a bit of a pass because Nunslaughter has released like a billion songs. So, you know, it's easy to get them confused, but there's definitely some ones in here that I was, you know, absolutely enamored with just getting a chance to hear them again. And playing one of the newer songs, Red is the Color of Ripping Death, off of the album of the same name. Absolutely love it. They throw in a really good tribute to Jim Sadis, and they had such an awesome set. And again, the whole thing was just fun, and I absolutely love that about this. And the fact that both bands are really different. Like, you get that brutal, heavy, more groove-laden sound with Kurnugia, and then Nunslaughter's fast, thrashy, just visceral attack. Two great bands just jamming it out in the studio. The production on it sounds absolutely amazing. And of course, the banter is absolutely hilarious too. If you have not checked out the split by Nunslaughter, I can understand why, because, you know, there's 74 of them. You're bound to miss a few. But I strongly recommend this one just because it's kind of unique, just because they're both studio jams, and yeah, they both sound incredible live. So, I mean, if you've never seen these bands live, this is kind of a good teaser of how awesome they are live. So yeah, check this one out. Nunslaughter rules, Kurnugia rules, and Ohio Death Metal rules. That's pretty much all I got there. At the Plates Omnivore. This is the second album from this Virginia-based, pun-loving death metal / melodic death metal act. I think I found out about this band courtesy of Pitlord. I think they made a post about them on their Facebook, and I thought it was like a spin-off project because Pitlord loves their puns too, and their theme is absolutely awesome. This kind of falls in the line of like bands like, well, Pitlord, Cannabis Corpse, and even Sluggage, and stylistically kind of close to Sluggage too. Like, not quite like the proggier later stuff, but like their earlier stuff. This kind of walks an interesting line between melodic death metal, flat out like Swedish death metal, and maybe even a little bit of blackened death metal. And the blend on here is pretty damn awesome. But of course, one of my main draws in here are the puns and references to different bands, different albums, because this band loves its puns and its themes, and they do it really well just in terms of song titles. Like the opening track, With Their Cutlets He'll Marinate, or Terminal Fillet Disease, which ties in beautifully with At the Plates too. And even their logo kind of is very reminiscent of the old school At the Gates logo. I'm pretty sure that wasn't an accident. And I can't help but to think the cover is a reference to heritage in a little way. I don't know. It might be. Either way, would not surprise me. But musically, this is pretty damn awesome. You have a lot of songs that kind of reach back into like the, you know, early to mid 90s in terms of like melodic death metal. Lots of good lead harmonies. There's not like a tremendous amount of solos, but you know, there's a lot of good catchy melodies on here. But this does get like flat out brutal and heavy, and not just like in a, you know, heavier melodic death metal sense, like, you know, just brutal in general. Roastwell 47, yeah, good hypocrisy reference there. Open Buffet Surgery, I really dig that one, especially the breakdown on it where the vocals really drop, because most of the time you kind of have like that kind of mid-register melodic death metal delivery where it's, I don't know, kind of like close to hypocrisy in terms of Peter's more like screamy voice, but they drop down like extra low and get like super brutal in there. And the awesome instrumental Into Everlasting Friar. These songs just have like a little bit more brutality to them. I would say, you know, like closer to like Bloodbath and Entombed rather than, you know, like, you know, In Flames or At the Gates or anything like that. But that was something where I really kind of drew that comparison to Sluggage in general, just because there's a lot of variety on the album. Like, there's not just one particular style, it's a blend of different styles, and they do it really well. I will say that the production is like a little bit dry on it, and it feels really compressed. Like, I feel like, you know, like a little bit more low end or just kind of like openness on it would, you know, probably give it like a little bit more heft. I also will say on the CD version here, there are long pauses in between tracks, which kind of like takes away from the momentum, because like in between each one, I feel like there's like, you know, 2 to 5 seconds of just dead air. But with the CD version, you do get 2 bonus tracks in here, All Rice Blends and December Flower, Flour. But yeah, even without the puns, this would be pretty damn awesome. But with the puns, it's even more endearing, just because I like puns and I like references to metal. And I like metal just kind of getting out there and having fun and being ridiculous and just, you know, goofy. That keeps it interesting. It can't be like dark and serious and Satan and zombies and all that shit all the time. Loosen up, have some fun. And that is exactly what this album does, while also packing in a lot of like sick riffs and killer melodies on it. If you like, God, I would say like Bloodbath and Hypocrisy are like the two big ones I really get on here, but there's definitely some At the Gate stuff on here. You know, a little bit of like early In Flames, and I would even say like Carcass too. Check this out. This is an absolutely good time, packed with killer riffs and just ridiculous song titles. I'm pretty sure the lyrics are even more ridiculous. I didn't get a chance to read them, but I have a good feeling about them. But yeah, check it out. Good stuff. Abyssus, Relics of the Past. This is the 4th EP from this Greek death metal act. I actually got in this band, well, courtesy of John and Miller. They ended up reviewing their full-length Death Revival in my absence, and I actually went out and checked it out, and their comparisons were pretty spot on, because they repeatedly said, like, dude, these guys kind of sound like Obituary. And yeah, especially when I looked at the album cover for that, it's like, man, that almost looks like The Incomplete, except with like lava and fire in it. But in my book, sounding like Obituary is not a complaint, really, because Obituary is awesome. Now, this is a much shorter release. In fact, there's only 2 originals on here and 3 covers. In fact, they do some really solid covers of Hellhammer, Possessed, and Terrorizer on here, and they're all like really faithful, solid covers. The 2 originals I think are pretty solid, very straightforward, 90s old school death metal, lots of groove to them. Production-wise, this kind of has like a jammed-in studio sort of vibe. Like, there is this constant analog hum. You can hear it whenever the tracks kick off. Like, there's generally like a few seconds or like a half second where you can kind of hear the hum come in, and then we're off to the, you know, just flat-out 90s death metal riffs and groove and some very tardy-ish vocals, I'll have to admit. Occasionally you get a little bit of like the early Chuck Schuldiner vocals too, which are kind of comparable to tardy too, but especially on the breakdown of the title track in here, like it's pure Obituary, like right down the riffs, the vocals, the groove. And again, nothing wrong with that. As much as I like the originals, the covers were a lot of fun. Like, I absolutely love their cover of Possessed Death Metal. And Hellhammer's Aggressor is really awesome. And Condemned System, originally done by Terrorizer, is awesome as well. I just love it when bands cover Terrorizer, because Terrorizer's awesome. World Downfall, I still think, is like one of the best death grind / grindcore albums to ever come out. And they did a faithful job on that cover as well as the other ones. Not really much more to say about this one, since it is a really short offering. Like, it's maybe like 20 minutes, like a little bit over that. And you only got 2 originals on here to really dissect their own sound. But yeah, this is just a fun EP, and if you like Obituary, for damn sure, and you just want to hear some really cool death metal covers, check this one out. I would recommend checking out Death Revival too. It's an awesome album. But yeah, if you're just looking for some classic old school fun, check this out. Baphomet, Death in the Beginning. This is essentially a reissue from this Buffalo, New York band's original test press before they released their, what I would call legendary, The Dead Shall Inherit debut album. I absolutely love that album. I think it is a staple in New York death metal in general. But I had never actually heard this test press, because this test press is interesting because, well, A, there's like only 50 copies of it. It's like super rare up until the point they started reissuing it. But it's also interesting because the songs that are on that test press, they were the test press for The Dead Shall Inherit. They're different. There's like different songs, different song titles, and even some of the original songs are slightly tweaked. So it's almost like, you know, kind of like an interesting demo that came out and then just didn't get circulated at all. Like, I believe there are 4 tracks on here that did not make The Dead Shall Inherit. Either that or they were retitled and restructured and became a song on that debut. This was kind of like one I wanted to pick up because I've been wanting to do a retro review for The Dead Shall Inherit for a while, but I figured I should get this at least so I can hear at least the original workings of the songs and hear some of these songs that didn't or maybe did pop up on that album. Musically, this is very similar to The Dead Shall Inherit. It's very brutal, but also very thrashy. Lots of like early Cannibal Corpse vibes, especially on Leave the Flesh. And production-wise, it does sound a bit more like a demo. Like, the guitars are a little bit more of a thrash tone. They don't have like that extra kind of like brutal chunkiness that you hear on the debut album. And I will say there's also like a touch of suffocation in terms of like those more brutal grooves, those like more angular riffs that pop up in Suffocation songs. They're kind of scattered all over here. But what I thought was really interesting were the OG versions of the songs that would end up on the Dead Shall Inherit. You can actually hear, you know, subtle differences in terms of the song structure, and again with this more rough production, they definitely sound different. Now this version also throws on some live tracks from back in the 90s, and I mean they sound pretty damn rough, like they aren't recorded particularly well. I mean it doesn't sound like they were professionally recorded at all, but I mean who cares, it's kind of just like, you know, capturing the moment sort of thing. Overall, though, I dug this. I think this is a pretty interesting release. Again, I don't know if it's like super necessary. You do, again, get some different versions of songs you would hear on The Dead Shall Inherit. And I don't know if some of those other songs in here that had different titles were ones that were just reworked later or just abandoned completely. But it is a really good listen overall in terms of just like old school 90s death metal. It is really cool that they did reissue this though. If you're a big fan of just 90s death metal and New York death metal in general, I'd still strongly recommend it. But if I was going to recommend one, it would definitely be The Dead Shall Inherit. Like that album is just absolutely killer. And now that I have this, I figure we can probably do a retro review at some point. But yeah, if you have not checked this out before, give it a whirl. It's pretty good. Internal Bleeding, Voracious Contempt. This is a 2023 reissue of their 1995 debut, Long Island, Brutal Death / Slam Pioneers. I'm not the biggest Slam fan, and you know, I've definitely talked about that before, but I do like this band in terms of them laying the groundwork for the style and the fact that there's a lot more to them than just Slam versus a fair amount of Slam bands that I've listened to. I've been slowly getting back into more of their stuff. I picked up Driven to Conquer not too long ago, and I really enjoyed that album. And that is just a well-rounded, solid death metal album, flat out. Like, it doesn't come across as too slammy. You know, it's got good brutal death metal elements as well as just flat out riffs and groove. Like, if you're just a flat out death metal fan, I think you would enjoy that one. Musically, though, this one lives up to being a lot more gritty and slammy. Like there's a lot of stuff in here that just sounds like a more primal version of like early Suffocation or even Pyrexia. Like this kind of goes to the throat in terms of the slammy grooves. And of course you have blast beats, and it's a very Mike Smith style blast beat that is the dominant one on here. The guitars, and to a degree even the bass, kind of have like a Mortician vibe, like super heavy, very fuzzy and gritty sounding. The syncopated grooves hit harder than hell. This is very go for the throat, kind of meat and potatoes, brutal death metal. And honestly, I really like the vocals too. The vocals are generally like a bone of contention I have with a lot of slam acts where it just turns into just pig vomit everywhere. These are just solid guttural vocals. Like he hits really good lows. They don't come across as the stereotypical slam, you know, vocal lines. While there's not like a tremendous amount of variety on here, it does hit harder than hell. It does favor the, you know, slams and grooves more, but I mean, these guys were kind of pioneering a sound, so I can't really blame them for laying on that particular element because that was a defining element of their sound. I also do like the fact that they sampled The Untouchables and God of Subservience, the whole De Niro Scarface rant. I want his family dead, I want him dead, like that whole bit. I love that movie. And I love De Niro, and he's immensely quotable. And yeah, they're from New York. Why not sample De Niro? Why not sample like super threatening De Niro too? Like that's about as threatening of a quote as you can get in terms of De Niro quotes. But yeah, this is a pretty solid debut. Hopefully they reissue more of their albums because I'm still missing a couple of the earlier ones. In fact, I think the earliest one I have is Driven to Conquer, and that's like, what, 4 albums in or something? Either way, if you like bands like Suffocation, Pyrexia, I mean, even to a degree, I would say like Baphomet, maybe even like 200 Stab Wounds a bit, Mortician. Lots of just ridiculously heavy, brutal bands that is 100% the crowd that this album travels with, so check it out. Rotrevore, Hung by the Eye Sockets. This is the 3rd EP from this Pennsylvania-based death metal act. I saw this band at MDF in 2022, absolutely killer set. Felt like I should have been listening to this band for years because their lone full-length Iniquitous came out forever ago. Ended up buying the album and a shirt, and I saw this when I was diving around in distros, and I was like, well, it's got Rotrevore's name on it. I'm just going to check it out. And this is absolutely awesome, but very different than Iniquitous. Iniquitous definitely had a lot of like Napalm Death and Bolt Thrower in it, like lots of groove, lots of brutality. And despite having a more sinister looking album cover, it was very socio-political in terms of its lyrical content. I really just flat out dig that album. This one, however, sounds a lot more like Immolation than anything else. You have a lot of Immolation's big, tropes just in terms of their songwriting. The weird off-time drums where you have blast beats that will turn into fills that actually kind of work their way into the drum pattern itself. Strange, lurching, dissonant riffs and tags at the end of the riffs. And even the vocals, dude sounds a lot like Ross Dolan. The guitars are heavier than hell in here. In fact, that may be like one of the few slight differences from Immolation. I'm not saying Immolation's guitars aren't heavy. That would be a ridiculous thing to say because they are. But these almost kind of have like a little bit more of like a HM2 sort of sizzle to them, like bordering on buzzsaw, but they're playing flat out Immolation style riffs to it. So it kind of creates a very different sound because generally when I hear HM2, I'm pretty much thinking like, all right, I'm going to hear a lot of like D-beat and kind of down picking and just stupid heavy riffs that are meat and potatoes, and I'm going to let that tone ring out and destroy my eardrums. I welcome that every time. This, however, lots of like technical riffs and again like weird atonal patterns, and that coupled with the wild drum work on here, it's hard not to make Immolation comparisons. Now this only has 3 tracks in it, but every track is over 5 minutes, so it doesn't feel like just a super short offering. Each song has a lot of cool dynamics to it. The first 2, the title track and Blindsided Attack, are notably like the 2 big aggressive ones, like just super heavy and chuggy and just mean. But the last track, Overcome with Hate, is the one that kind of builds that sinister, kind of slow, murky atmosphere. Honestly, I loved all 3 tracks in here. I think this is all quality work. And man, it kind of makes me even more sad that like this is the most recent offering because it's been over a decade. Generally, when you bring up this band to the fans, it's a lot of like, man, I really wish those guys would get together and put out some new music. But I don't know, it just doesn't seem to happen. And, who knows what the reasoning is in terms of like, hey, we just couldn't get together. We all had to get jobs, scheduling, lots of lineup changes. All that stuff can play into why a band doesn't put out, albums. But I would totally welcome a new offering from this band because this EP is just flat out killer and shows a different side of their sound, at least in comparison to the full length. Pretty much if you like Immolation, I'm pretty damn sure you're going to dig this. But I also strongly recommend Iniquitous. That is an absolutely killer, I guess technically one and done full length for this band. Hopefully I'm wrong on that one, but I strongly recommend it. It has a totally different vibe than this, but both of them are just absolutely excellent in just different ways. So yeah, check this out. This is absolutely killer. Escarnium, Godless Shrine of Decay. This is a compilation from this Brazilian death metal act. Originally it came out in 2015. This is the 2022 reissue from Redefining Darkness Records. I got this in the Metalhead box, and when I looked at the track list, it was like, yeah, this is definitely a comp. I mean, there's a lot of songs in here. And I was definitely right. The other thing was, well, I own everything on here except for 2 tracks. So all this I'm very familiar with. Like this band I've been listening to for years. Their album Indhentet in particular is such a banger. It's like Morbid Angel meets Christian. Kind of moves at that Christian speed, but it has all those big, heavy, just sinister as hell sounding Morbid Angel riffs on it. What's not to love, right? I like all their other stuff, but that album is the big standout. Now this actually has like their original demo, which apparently is super rare, and I own it. And it's a CDR, so like I think it's like actually made by the band. But yeah, everything on here was stuff I already had. So I'm really not going to go over every track in here because they're all things that I've probably brought up in collection updates before. But I'll just say flat out, I recommend this band in general. I think they're really solid. We, in fact, reviewed their last album, and I thought that one was pretty good, too. But the 2 songs I didn't have in here are Salvation Through Zyklon B and Rex Verminorum. And both of them are awesome and pretty much fall into what I have come to expect from this band. Salvation Through Zyklon B, I would say, is the most like straightforward, aggressive track out of the 2 there. just comes in with stampeding drums, those deep, heavy tremolos, roared vocals. Like, this band is just heavier than hell. And Rex Verminorum is probably the more atmospheric and sinister of the two, at least in terms of how it starts. It eventually starts breaking into blast beats, but they're like very thrashy blast beats. So, I don't know, stuff you would hear like on like Malevolent Creation or stuff like that. So at least out of this, I got 2 songs that I hadn't heard by the band, but yeah, I have everything else. And honestly, if you're just looking to get into this band and you don't want to like hunt down all the albums, this comp actually covers like the majority of their stuff. I think the only album that doesn't cover is their newest one, and I mean, you can still probably find that one on Redefining Darkness too. So this actually works as like a really good sampler offering for the majority of their career, because a lot of these songs, again, you can find on all their albums. I believe there are some differences in terms of their first full length, because it's the Brazilian version that they have on here versus the one that was released internationally. Though I don't think there's a tremendous amount of difference there, but I mean, I suppose there's enough to justify putting that version on here just so people can hear the original. But yeah, if you like, again, Christian, Morbid Angel, Incantation, maybe even a little bit of Hate Eternal too, check this comp out, check this band out in general. And again, I strongly recommend the album Inheritus. I think that is probably my favorite by this band. But yeah, you really can't go wrong with this, because it's just absolutely killer Brazilian death metal. So check it out. All right, we have a pair here from Undergang. And I'm going to butcher at least saying the album titles here. We have their debut full-length Indhentet off Doden, maybe? And then their second album, Till Doden os Skiller. Might have got that one wrong too. Anyway, we've been going over this Danish band for a while now. Just absolutely amazing, swampy, gross death metal. And in that time, we have learned to say absolutely nothing correctly in Danish. I think that's actually some sort of achievement there. It is a time-honored tradition for thralls to be completely immune to learning how to say anything correctly in a foreign language. Anyway, yet another pair here that I saw while I was distro diving, and I've been meaning to actually get a lot of their earlier work just because I absolutely love this band. Now this one I know is a reissue. This originally came out in 2009, and this is a reissue on Extreme Music that came out in 2011, and this is a mispress, apparently. I didn't know that. But the track order, at least within the first 2 tracks, is off because there's supposed to be like a separate intro there, and they just tracked it wrong. But for me, never having heard this album, it really didn't hurt it that much. And then this one came out in 2012, and I believe it initially came out through this label, either that or as a repress, I'm not entirely sure. Either way, the main thing was I got some more Undergang, and both of these albums are pretty damn awesome. Now, out of the 2, I prefer this first one. It is swampy, murky, disgusting. The grooves on here are so damn good. This band just brings riff after riff. It's like someone whirled up like all the best parts of Bolt Thrower and like Autopsy and Incantation and just stirred it into a nice viscous, snotty stew, and then just put it out on here, and then use the leftover murk to come up with an absolutely amazing band logo. It's murky as hell, lots of low end. Vocally, it's a little bit different than a lot of their stuff. This hasn't kind of gone full bullfrog mode yet. They haven't hit that Demolish level of croak yet. This is just straightforward, just kind of, you know, standard death metal vocals. Granted, it is more driven by the riffs and the vocals, and I mean, it's all in Danish. I don't understand what the hell they're saying, but I imagine it's probably something about something disgusting. But it is interesting that the vocals are different, because I'm used to hearing that, you know, super low burp from these guys. But I love pretty much everything on here. You have fits that are fast and almost kind of death grindish. You have death doom moments where they let the tone just sort of drone out and ooze through your speakers. And the breakdowns in here are just filthy, like some flat out brutal ones. And I wrote down some of the names of the songs that had them, but I just can't pronounce them. But, you know, why not just give them a whirl? Like the third track, Op Slugged Off Morket, whatever that is. And the track, Tvang Stanker. I don't know what that is. That sounds hilarious. Either way, the breakdowns in those 2 songs that I butchered are heavier than they are hard to pronounce. But yeah, this is just pure old school death metal glory, riffier in hell, kind of muddy and swampy, but in a really good way. Absolutely love this one. This one, I like it, but not as much as this one. This one still packs all the nasty riffs. The production is a little bit different. I feel like they went to make this one sound like a little bit more polished, but also still gritty, and kind of missed the mark a little bit. Like the guitar tone here is notably different. It's not nearly as muddy and murky. It's a little bit crispier. And musically, this one's a little bit closer to Incantation overall, which is not a bad thing at all. But I don't know, there's some things in here that, you know, I didn't necessarily like as much as I did on here. Like musically, it's still very similar, but one of the big things there, the songs on here are much longer overall, and I would say the album itself is much longer. They feel a little bit more drawn out, and well, one of the reasons is they have like a movie sample before almost every track in here, which I like hearing that, but not before like every single track. And I mean, it sounds like they're all Danish films, so they're all speaking Danish, so I have no idea what they're saying in terms of like the relevance to the lyrics, which actually it really doesn't matter anyway because I can't understand those either. But it did get to be a bit much considering, you know, it was like every track on here. I also feel like the songwriting is a little bit more straightforward. Like you have kind of all the tropes that were on here, but it feels like less dynamic. Like you have the two steps, you have the giant breakdowns on here, the more swampy Death Doom moments. The giant size instrumental closer, in fact, is like probably one of the doomiest things I've ever heard from this band. But overall, it doesn't quite compare to like the vibe and the filth that is on this album. Like I feel like they tried to make like a bigger, nastier album, and it does succeed at being heavy and brutal as hell, but it's just not quite as interesting as this one. And this one I feel like is working with like a little bit less in terms of like all the colors in the palette, I guess. But overall, I dug them both. I dig this band. I think they're just absolutely gross and rotten, and you know, they're just plain fun to listen to. The only drawback about going over this band is maybe trying to attempt to say some of the song titles, which you know, why not? I'll take a crack at a couple of these. Habet Ligblecht, I don't know. Strangularit, Narbornin Door. There we go. Those are some words that I said that may or may not be close to what they actually are on here. I mean, it's a good thing they put it in, you know, kind of a gnarly, gross font on the back too, so it adds a whole other level of difficulty to already difficult things. Anyway, this band rules. Check out both. I favor this one a little bit more than this one, but overall, I think they're both really good. If you like Incantation, Autopsy, Bolt Thrower, just the grossest, gnarliest old school death metal, it is definitely this band. Honestly, you can check out any of their albums, and I think you're doing pretty well, but yeah, check out these for damn sure. Woods of Grief, Vanquished by Unending Grief. This is the debut album from this German Death Doom / Funeral Doom act. Yet another one I got in the Metalhead box, and I guess it would be black metal, depressive black metal, or I even said Death Doom. I think I said Death Doom. Either way, it's Death Doom, for damn sure. Probably closer to Funeral Doom, as this is very slow, lumbering, and man, is this thing sad. Like right from the rip of the opening pianos on My Lullaby to Mourn To. Instantly depressing. It takes a little while to build, and I kind of thought this was like a long opening track in terms of like an instrumental or like a lead-in. But it kind of makes sense because all these songs are long, and the only two songs that have a different title are the opening and closing tracks, which are intros and outros. The rest of this is the title track of the album broken up into, well, 3 parts on here, but actually I would say 5 parts, at least in terms of how it's tracked. When it gets down to the doomy, heavy, syncopated chugs and the lush atmosphere and cavernous growls, like this thing is just dark. Like this is suffocating, slow, brooding, and I really dig it. This album runs like a jam session between Temple of Void, Esoteric, and probably Shape of Despair. It is at times just absolutely brutal and heavy when it comes down to just, you know, the riffs themselves and just the atmosphere, like kind of pulling away from sadness and just, you know, bringing in like all the heavy darkness, like, let's see, Vanquished by Unending Grief, Part 3, Still I Wander the Dark Woods, and specifically it is Movement 2 of Part 3, Endlessly I Walk. There's also some big heavy bends in that song in particular. I can't remember which movement it was, Lost the Light or Forever Be Doomed or Endlessly I Walk. I don't know, like they're very long songs, they're very drawn out, and in terms of how the album flows, it is one track after the next. And I mean, if you're going to use the title track and break it up into movements, it is probably wise to make it all sound like one continuous track. But it's the third track, Vanquished by Unending Grief, Part 2, Blinded by Fear, I think is probably my big standout. It's a great balance of just absolutely heavy, crushing death doom riffs and some really awesome somber melodies. The song is very dynamic. I love the transitions. While you have, for the most part, these giant, huge, cavernous roars that are all over here. Very similar to Temple of Void. There's also some desperate screams that come out, like a dude with a broken leg at the bottom of a well. That's kind of a frequent comparison we make, but that is exactly how it sounds. But the dynamic shifts between like more somber, clean passages that pop up that lead into giant, heavy sections. Like, I love that. This whole album takes you on a very depressing journey. Like, wherever the focal character of this story is going, it is not going to end well. Like, it's gonna end kind of like, you know, The Mist, I think. There's even some occasional moments where there are blast beats that show up just to kind of break you out of the sullen stupor that this album will put you in. And then occasionally it just takes that whole doom formula and just adds more brutality to it. It's like brutal doom, I guess. Like someone braining someone else with a sledgehammer in slow motion and they're both really sad about it. Like, that's the sort of vibe that these more brutal sections have. I really dug this, and man, it sounds absolutely amazing as far as the production. Like, it is very big and open. I do think the intro and outro, well, they do work as a good setup and closing. They do feel kind of unnecessary because, like, the massive song itself really just kind of captures it all. It really doesn't need like a giant lead in, but I can kind of get it. The outro in particular feels a little bit more like an afterthought though. This Grave Apathy. It's very bassy, and you know, on top of the big droning bass in there, you have these Godzilla-sized footsteps that seem like they're echoing throughout it. It just doesn't seem like the right way to close this album. Like, they could have closed it with the last movement of the last part of the title track. And I'm reasonably sure like peak levels of depression would have been hit right there. And yeah, it would have capped off this album brilliantly. Outside of that though, I really dig this. This is just slow and morose and bleak and surprisingly just very catchy. Like, this is really well-written music, and I dig the hell out of this. If you're a big fan of funeral, skepticism, esoteric, maybe a little bit of Hooded Menace, Temple of Void, all the slow, miserable stuff in the world in terms of like funeral doom and death doom and such, it's this. So yeah, definitely check it out. All right, so these next three are actually ones that were sent to me by the artist himself. As a commenter and subscriber to the channel, and asked if I would like to check out some of his music. I was like, yeah, man, if you can send me some CDs, that'd be awesome. And he actually went out of his way to actually make burn CDs for me, so I think that was really cool of him. But he did send a cool letter. So his project is called Puritan Opiate. Hey, Nick and John. Well, it's just me this time, but whatever. Thanks so much for checking out my stuff. Thralls is my favorite metal YouTube channel, so it's really cool just to know you're giving it a listen. In addition to semi-experimental metal, I also make dark ambient music. It's pretty obvious that I'm a huge Blood Incantation fan. So I also threw in a copy of my latest full-length of the chill synth-based shit, Desiccated Echoes. I know the packaging of the CDs is a bit shoddy. This is very much a DIY enterprise, but I really hope you enjoy the tunes. And if you do, there's plenty more on my Bandcamp and YouTube pages. Thanks again, guys. Jason Clements, Massachusetts, USA, Earth. He actually threw an Earth there just to make sure we weren't foggy on that. Well, first off, thanks for being like a super cool fan. You know, I appreciate the love given to the channel here. It's always, you know, just awesome hearing that. Like, it really does mean a lot to us. And I wouldn't even worry about the packaging of the CDs. Like, you know, I just wanted something tangible because I'm just a physical media whore. But no, I really wanted to check this out because, again, you sent me 3 very different projects all under the same banner. And I like the fact that you're willing to experiment with stuff. So I'm going to go over them in the order that I listened to them. And the first one I listened to, there will be some album art like right over here, is the Desiccated Echoes one, which was the dark synth ambient one. And honestly, this is really cool. Like, very much in the vein of like Tangerine Dream. I would even say Blood Incantation's Time Wave Zero for those that like that. And of course, for those that are still like, I can't believe they put out an ambient synth album when they said they were going to put out an ambient synth album. That's just weird. But yeah, this is really cool. Like, this is definitely the longest one out of the 3 he sent me. There's a track in here that is over 22 minutes, and honestly, it's all very chill, spacey, and very cinematic too, especially the big 22-minute track, Intolerable Allegories. I think I wrote that down right. It's just a huge sounding, like, I don't know, sci-fi, not necessarily very horror. Like, it does have its more sinister moments that pop up on the album, but a lot of this, like, I get like big 70s and 80s sci-fi movie sort of scores, and I really dig that sort of thing. And the chill vibe is on point. I would say it's comparable to Time Wave Zero, but I feel like there's more going on here. Like, the layers might not be as deep in terms of like, the production and such on Time Wave Zero, but there's more transitions into like different melodic passages and such. And yeah, the chill vibe, I mean, legit, I've listened to this multiple times, and 2 of the times I actually nodded off. So chill vibe absolutely achieved on here, because like, this is, I don't know, like kind of like that new age religion meditation sort of vibe, like in terms of like just enhance your calm. And believe me, you can totally do that to this. Like, this is just good background music to just decompress to, and I really kind of dug that. I kind of wish I had headphones, because I imagine like some of those big bassy synth swells were almost like brain massages in a way. But yeah, I really dug this one. Like, this one was particularly good just in terms of a nice decompress, because before I jammed this one, I was just jamming an absolute shitload of death metal. This put the brakes on that intensity like you wouldn't believe, but in a really good way. But yeah, this one really enjoyed. And then the next one I listened to was Porous, and this is the atmospheric death metal side. Now, this one just has 2 tracks, You Will Alight Before a Nefarious Being and Extinction from Within, and they're both pretty good. I like the fact that atmosphere is a big part of Jason's stuff. The synths make an appearance too behind the guitars. The guitars have like a very like thin kind of tinny sound. So while I do think it kind of misses a bit of that like bottom heavy chunkiness that I like in death metal, it contributes heavily to the atmosphere, and this is very melodic. Like, I was expecting something a little bit more, intense, because again, he brought up Blood Incantation, and Blood Incantation is intense as hell. But this really kind of just sticks to the haunting melodic passages and that lush sound, and it kind of sticks to like a steady groove on the drums. And the drums I did have kind of an issue with, and it's more or less just production. They do stick to a groove, which really isn't, like a huge thing. Like, there's cool fills in between and like some breaks. But the drums are very muffled on here, so at times you can't necessarily hear them, especially the snare. When I listen to music, especially, death metal, black metal, like the snare's got to have like a good pop to it where you can really make it out. If it gets lost in the mud, you can lose the rhythm occasionally. Now, Extinction from Within, I would say, is probably the darker of the 2 tracks. Like, it just has a more moody vibe. It is less about the melodies, or at least the melodies are a little bit more sinister and dissonant. This one has like a little bit more of like a swinging groove to it, and I have to say I like the bass work on it. The bass work, there's some really cool noodles and melodies on there that kind of float behind the very atmospheric and still kind of very tinny guitars. Both of these songs really kind of feel like jam sessions. Like, you're kind of just sticking to like a pattern and then kind of building upon it. And I like that vibe. Like, these kind of come across as like rough drafts or the early workings of songs that would become more ornate later. But I like the overall atmospheric vibe. It does need like a little bit more of a hefty crunch for me. But overall, I like the style itself. Like, that atmospheric kind of heavy sound. I think, again, with just like some better production. And this is very DIY, so I'm not going to fault the production. Like, this was probably done in-house. But with bigger production, I think this would sound a lot better and probably give it the added weight that it's going for. But yeah, overall, pretty solid. And the last of the three here, January's Rust, is I think the most recent. I think this one came out in 2024. I think more than likely in January. This is his doom metal or sludge metal album. Interestingly enough, he described it as occasionally optimistic, which optimism is rarely ever a thing I look for in doom metal. If optimism manages to creep its way into doom metal, I don't know if it's doom metal anymore. Like, it kind of has to be morose. But the fact that these are all instrumental, you don't have like the, you know, very forlorn lyrics and, you know, the vocal delivery that you would associate with doom on top of it. So I suppose there might be room for optimism because no one's telling you about how bad their day is or how much they just long to die. But this one has 3 songs on it and they're all a bit longer, like kind of in that range of like 7 to 10 minutes. Catastrophic, Barren, and Ye Generation of Vipers. And this one might be my favorite out of the batch here. I like really somber, melancholy, dreary doom metal. And stylistically, like, this definitely seems like it takes some cues from like Esoteric, My Dying Bride, that sort of thing, albeit like all instrumental. But the frequent droning guitars mashed up with the lush synths on here really just create like just that perfect doomy atmosphere in here. Again, the drums are a little bit muffled and occasionally in transition I would kind of lose the snare again and, you know, have to kind of pick up in the rhythm a little bit later. But in terms of like the guitar riffs and just that overall melancholy but still very melodic feel, it's really well done. Out of the 3, probably the most dark sounding one is Barren. That one is notably a little bit more sinister, but all of them kind of have the same qualities but arranged very differently. Like, there's still a lot of melody on these. I would say melody is a very big thing with this work because there's really not anything on here that I would say is like just heavy without melody. Everything is generally backed by, you know, somber riffs or those lush weeping synths in the background, and I really dig it. Again, being very DIY and, you know, kind of muffled and very raw. Again, this is another thing I would say with better production, it would sound even bigger and more just, you know, oppressive, especially on the big droning riffs on Ye Generation of Vipers. There is like, you know, something missing in terms of like that added oppressive heft of a giant droning tone. But musically, in terms of like how the songs are arranged and such, I really dig this. Whereas Poor still feels like a little bit more like a rough draft of sorts. This one's a little bit more polished. Like, the transitions feel a little bit more hammered out. I think the dynamics are even grander on here. So yeah, like, this one, probably my favorite. And I mean, honestly, I liked them all, but I don't know, that synth album, man, like, that is just a good thing to sit back and chill to. But yeah, all 3 are really cool. And again, super appreciative. Thank you, Jason, for sending me your stuff. I really appreciate the fact that you value our opinion enough for us to go over it. And yeah, I think you have the foundation of something really cool, whichever direction you choose to go with this band, or if you continue to just put out like different genres in terms of what you're going for under the same banner. I don't know, it's kind of a cool idea. It definitely keeps your fans guessing in terms of like what you're gonna do next. I'd like to hear a Puritan opiate grindcore album if you got that in your wheelhouse too. Like, I like the adventurous spirit of all this, but yeah, good stuff. Check it out. I'm gonna probably post the YouTube stuff and Bandcamp stuff on here for them just so you can check it out for yourself. But once again, thank you very much. And definitely check out all 3 of these. And that is it for yet another collection update, and might be a little bit before the next one. I mean, who knows? I don't know when this one's gonna come up, but I haven't been going out and doing like, you know, super huge amounts of shopping in terms of like releases here. And most of the releases that have come out this year that I have picked up are ones that we have already reviewed, but I'm sure I'll pick up a bunch of random stuff and go over it soon because I know me. I know how my brain works, and I'm pretty sure you guys know too because we're almost at 150 of these. So yeah, there will be collection updates, trust me. But I'm also working on some States of Metal stuff, and I have another video series that I'm working on, and it should be a lot of fun and should invite a lot of discussion in the comments. But outside of that, of course, album rankings, Black Dahlia Murder, we have a date set, and We're going to get to recording that one relatively soon. We might have already recorded it by the time you see this. Who knows? Either way, that'll be up, and then we're on to Meshuggah, and I have a fun way for us to select the next batch of bands we'll go over. So, of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel in the banner in the bottom right-hand corner. But if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com. We have shirts. We have old shirts that are discounted, provided we have your size. We even have hats. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, the link down below. And of course, thank you guys so much for everything. You guys are large in part the reason why this channel has been far more successful than I had ever dreamed. And yeah, we have a ton of stuff we want to talk about, and it's just awesome kind of, building this up and building this cool community, because I mean, this has honestly been one of the coolest things I've done in my life, and I owe you guys all the gratitude in the world. Like, you guys have made this so much fun to do, and yeah, it's just been an absolute blast. So once again, big thank you to you guys, and we will catch you later.